What is up, Internet? It is the end of the first day of Expedition League 3.15, and for the first time in a very long time, we are not playing Freezing Pulse totems. We are playing totems, however. Like I mentioned in my last video, I did not update the Freezing Pulse totems guide. I do not currently feel compelled to do so. I don't think the build's dead, but it's nerfed enough that I'm not confident in updating the guide until I see for myself exactly where it stands in terms of league starters. So what we did is we put together a Forbidden Rite totems plan. You can find like the sort of basic PoB outline for that in the description of this video. And for the most part, it's built pretty similarly to Freezing Pulse totems the way I used to go about it. At least start, we rolled Holy Flame totem. We just run like 4-link with multiple totems, spell totem, and then like Wave of Conviction with combustion, and then we have, you know, Holy Flame totem. We had to drop infused channeling on Holy Flame totem, and that just got replaced with added fire. And we ran 4 links on that right up until about the end of the campaign. I was really interested in trying to transition into Forbidden Rite totems as fast as I could, so I picked up a 4-link Soul Mantle at the time, and this scuffed, super scuffed gear, right? I've got just the two cheapest Kigzaras I could get, the 4-link, and like a 13% self flag. And as you can see, the skill tree is pretty close to what I have in the PoB. There's some adjustments for, like right here, right? Typically I want to connect over here, get this dexterity, and skip. There's a lot of wasted points here in these elemental damage nodes. But I actually need this resistance at the moment. I've even picked up 2 more points to get Faith and Steel for more all-res, so I could make the swap as early as possible. So some things are like a little bit scuffed right now. I'd like to be fully into Shaman's Dominion by now, and you know, working on like Annihilation and trying to get over to Assassination or Doomcast or something until I get a medium. The main thing I wanted to learn was, can I switch without a medium cluster for totem health and totem chaos resistance? The answer right now anyway is for sure yes. On the 4-link, it was actually a pretty immediate improvement over Holy Flame totem on a 4-link when we got the Soul Mantle set up, and that was running greater volley, increased crit damage, and increased critical strikes. No quality on anything. It was a level 15 Forbidden Rite. I just actually 5-linked this Soul Mantle before the video. It was like after the stream. I still had a small pile of fusings, and it just got lucky. Our other gear is just total trash. Still, I've put resists on it where I could. I've got mana on this. I'm like lower on life and higher on mana than I'd probably like to be. That has a little bit to do with the mana changes. I think what we'll do is we'll jump into this other tier 1. And I'll show you what it looks like on a 5-link, now that I have a 5-link. And you'll see that without the medium cluster, we're still doing just fine. I have no reservations anymore about switching. This is with greater volley, so that the amount of projectiles looks higher than what you'd think. That's because we're getting +4 projectiles from the volley. And one of the reasons I wanted to transition like this as soon as I could was to test for myself how extra projectiles worked. And it does seem to be that the extra projectiles are attached to your manual. So if you're not sure how Forbidden Rite works, you basically throw one of these projectiles targeted. Your totems are doing that for you in a totem build. If you were hand casting it though, I can show you actually if I just swap this out, it won't kill me on one cast. I can manually throw a projectile, right? So that's what Forbidden Rite does baseline. It just also targets up to 7 enemies around you and throws an extra homing projectile at them too. Well, adding projectiles from volley, for example, it adds projectiles to that manual targeted one. And those do seem to stack. Those are effectively hitting single target. It's doing a lot of damage. I don't know in the long term. I'd like to update, see you know, PoB updated and start doing. It's a lot easier to do those kind of comparisons in Path of Building than it is by hand when the gem's not even in the building yet. But we may wind up leaving Greater Volley in, and it's Greater Volley instead of GMP, at least for me right now, because the way Volley typically modifies projectile skills, like a manually targeted one, it would put projectiles to the sides of you. This skill doesn't really have that kind of targeting behavior, so it's just sort of taking the raw +4 projectiles like GMP would, as far as I can tell anyway. And it's doing so with a less severe projectile damage penalty, and it's doing so with a slightly lower mana multiplier too. So I don't see any like downside to using Greater Volley over GMP at the moment. I typically don't use these gems, and if you've been watching my channel at all recently, you know I've been playing Freezing Pulse totems for a very long time, so I may be just a little bit ignorant on the behavior, and there's some other reason I would want to run GMP over Volley if I did run one of these. But one of the things I wanted to talk about while we, as you can see, we're just blasting, right? This is just a tier 1, obviously, but I'm level 70, like I just got to maps before I wrapped up the stream, and our gear is really junk outside of the fact that we have a 5-link soul mantle and the gear that allows us to wear it, right? Look at my wands, right? This wand is the closest thing to decent I have, and then I have literally my fire damage wand, my level 13 one from the campaign. I think that's like the end of Act 1 or something. I made that. I guess what we're here to talk a little bit about the expedition mechanic, because one of the reasons I always level really slowly compared to most people, especially content creators, which is because I really like doing the league content. This sort of like the first time you level your first character in a new league, you only get to experience that once per league. And I really just like to take my time and do all the league content and all the quests and get all the waypoint, everything. And this was definitely one of the more time-consuming league mechanics I've seen them add in a while. I would say on par, if not greater, than Harvest in terms of time consumption, especially when we get to the logbook stuff, which I'll probably save for the next video when I can actually do one on video and show you. But if you haven't seen it, the gist of it is that you're basically given dynamite to sort of immediately unearth some stuff, and the dynamite explodes in the order that you put them down in, right? And they have sort of a max range. So right now you start from the detonator, so I can only go about this far. You can see it doesn't let me put it out further. And I've got 5 pieces of dynamite, and you've got 3 choices, right? Or 3 targets that you can use this dynamite on. The first type of target are these chests. Most of these chests drop currency. Not regular currency, but like league-specific currency. We'll see some in a minute. They don't tend to drop a ton of other items, but the better the chest, the more types and higher qualities of the league currency you'll get, and you have a higher chance of getting like something besides currency. For the most part, though, you shouldn't expect to get tons of loot directly from these chests. The reward mechanic for this league is not really coming from these chests directly. It's coming from the currency. The second type are, you see these like skulls on little sticks and stuff. So this is determining how many enemies you're gonna unearth with that piece of dynamite, right? And so the bigger ones, like this one back here with the runes and the fancy stuff, this is a runic enemy, and they're like the new enemy type. There's a bunch of them, and they all have ward as a baseline defensive mechanic, and they're much scarier than your average rare. Juiced up ones from these poles can actually be pretty dangerous, especially when you start modifying them with this. And so these are about what you'd think, right? They're basically, you get one map modifier that's going to apply to everything that spawns from the expedition, and you get one bonus affix in exchange for taking on the penalty, right? So you can't leech with this one, but the runic monsters specifically, so the ones from these poles, would have 50% chance to drop additional currency. Now, the one thing to keep in mind that some people might not have noticed is that the order that these things detonate in matters. So if I set up like a chain, I'm not actually going to detonate this, but let's say I set up a chain like this, and it ended down here, right? In the range of this one. Well, this hits against monsters cannot be critical strikes will not apply to everything going off until this goes off at the end. So it's basically only going to apply to the monsters from this detonation onward, if there's any left. And so when you're thinking about, you can undo those, by the way, which is so handy. when you're thinking about like how you want to blow stuff up, you want to try and balance what you can handle in terms of modifiers against how many chests you're going to collect and what order you can go in to get the most modifiers earlier, assuming you can handle it, right? Because you basically, like, if there was a big chest up here, I would want to get like a good modifier like this one before I came up to fight these runic monsters. Or if there was one that improved league currency drops from chests, I would want to hit that before I hit one that had like 2 or 3 yellow chests in it, for example. And so there's a little bit of thought and planning when you're looking at the layout, like, oh, you know, do I just want to get the chests and get out of here, which is probably what you want to do for like your fast mapping strategy, or do you really want to chase like, you know, artifacts, which are the league currency, because that's where you're going to get more of the rewards from. In this case, because I've already wasted a bunch of your time talking about how it all works, I think we'll just blow this stuff up and get some of the rewards. This is pretty free because I don't leech anything. This one's also, I need crit, so I won't take this one. I'm going to keep that out of the radius on purpose because I don't want that affix. And then, I don't think I actually got a tether there, did I? There we go. And then we'll come over here and just get these guys here. I guess we can kind of catch that bottom one too, since that's safe. And then they'll go off in order. So we'll get the monster spawns, the chests that were excavated that we saw before all this started. And we didn't like unearth anything too dangerous in terms of like the number of runic monsters or the number of affixes we picked. But the monsters in general are tankier, right? These are much tankier than regular mobs, so do be a little bit careful. Like if you're in a higher tier map and you're doing maps that are like on level for you and kind of, you know, not trivial, that you don't unearth a bunch of runic monsters in a pack like that, because they can make your life pretty miserable. Now the type of artifacts you're going to get are based on who showed up. So Rog showed up, so I'm going to be getting artifacts for Order of the Chalice. And with his artifacts, he's like almost like a crafter. So he's going to sell you items that are identified, right? You can actually see the stats on them and the price of them. And if you buy them, or you choose to buy them, instead of immediately getting the item, he'll then offer you a way to modify the item as if you were spending crafting currency on it. But you can see, like, you know, it'll say something like add a suffix 5 times and choose the highest level affix, something like that. And you can skip one of those and try to get another one, but it makes the following more expensive. But if you pay for it, you can just keep using his crafting services as long as you have currency to pay for it. You can actually make some pretty decent items this way. I'd say he's, though, been the one that I've gotten the least value out of, because he's like the hardest to use, I would say. Because there's a lot of RNG going on there. When I get back to the hideout, I'll show you the other vendors and what they do, but I would say the haggling and the gambling are definitely the primary sources of where you're going to get your early rewards from this league mechanic. And it's been pretty rewarding, right? Like, I afforded my Soul Mantle, my 2 Kikazarus, my Self-Flagellation, and I still have like 10 Chaos left over from all that stuff. Just from, basically from haggling, really. I don't think I've gotten anything particularly good from gambling yet. So it's basically just been from haggling for currency from the like little guy. Let's go in here, and as you can see, the single target is definitely fine. We're not having any issues there. So yeah, these are the other vendors. This is the guy I would say that you want to focus on the most. Like, pay the most attention to what he's got to offer and like when you want to reroll. So he's got a selection of currency. Sometimes he's got gems, and I think he can have one other type of item, but usually it's like currency stacks, right? Now, I don't necessarily want any of these currencies right now. This would be okay, but he's asking for a lot. So I'm going to use one of my reroll currencies to reroll this. So here we got a 10 stack of chaos, which is pretty juicy. It is 78 greater, which is one of the more expensive types of his. But the way he works is that you click on it, and if I wanted to, I could just pay the full price and he will guaranteed give it to me. But let's say I wanted to offer him like half that, right? Like 38. We'll say 40, it'd be nice. See, and he's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. So now this range is now where we're capped at. My minimum offer and what he is willing to go down to. Now you can do this, like, from my experience, you could do this like 3 times, right? And if he doesn't take your offer any of those 3 times, as the range narrows, and you try to haggle him again, he'll actually just delete the item. He'll just say he's keeping it. But you can be pretty aggressive, it feels like. So now we got the 3rd one, and he put the offer at 50. I put it at 48 last time, so I'll just take the 50. And I got it from 78 down to 50, which is okay. Sometimes you can get it, like this is 32 lesser, so we'll take this one immediately. 32, let's try like 16. So he went all the way down to 26. We'll try like 20, and he took it. So this is a really, I mean, I just picked up 12C from like currency I got out of the campaign, right? Like this is a really easy way to get currency out of the league mechanic right now. Now these reroll coins are the only way you can refresh any of these vendors. They each have their own kind of reroll currency, and you want to keep your eye out for these especially. You'll start finding more of them around the second half of the campaign. The first half doesn't actually have that many. But this guy, the Warrior Scald, his deal is that he exchanges all these currencies, and he often sells the reroll currencies of the other guys. So this is a good way to find new rerolls. And he does charge different prices, right? So common sun artifacts or lesser sun artifacts. So pay attention to what he's offering. These up here, whenever you see these cost 1, he's basically making you even exchanges with other types of commons. But down below this row, so these 4 are all the 1-to-1s. Down here is like his limited offerings. So these are actually better exchange rates. So these top like 4 currency items, you can just, they're always there if you need them, and they're unlimited. These are the ones you want to pay attention to, because these are the ones that are actually going to change when you refresh this, and you could miss a deal, right? So these are the ones you want to pay attention to. This is the one guy that can offer logbooks too, which are like the blight map to the main mechanic, right? Which is, it is a lot like a blight map. I did one of them during the campaign at like level 25, I found, and it reminded me a lot of like a blight map that you can only do like half the map, I guess. But yeah, things are going pretty swimmingly considering my gear is terrible. I had no idea if this was going to work, although it looked pretty certain that it was going to work. And the league mechanic, despite being a little bit confusing, it feels kind of neat to me and interesting. I think I'm one of the only types of people, though, that really like that kind of like time-consuming stuff. I mean, it doesn't bother me that if it takes me 12 hours to level through the campaign, whereas I think it would probably bother a lot of people. So this kind of stuff where you get to like fiddle with things, I kind of enjoy that. Here's a pro tip if you didn't know. Make sure you come down here and click these affinity icons. There's one in the heist locker, and there's one in the new expedition locker somewhere. That might be down where they were. Okay, I don't know where. It's in town at least, right? If we go to like Act 1, I'm pretty sure we'll see it. Or Act 4, apparently. But it has one of these affinity icons on it too. Okay, I don't know where they went. Of course. Anyway, if we find the expedition locker in a town, there is one of these affinity icons on it. And when you do that, it behaves just like your stash, where when you control click it, it'll send like a heist item into the heist locker, or the expedition currency into like this. See, it just disappeared because it went into my expedition locker. So make sure you enable that. It's like a really great new feature of the patch. It's like after 4 a.m., so I don't want to make this video any longer than it needs to be. I want to say that I'm enjoying myself because I like the fiddliness of the league, I guess, a little bit, but there's some other things like the nerfs to mana and mana multipliers I'm not as convinced about yet. I felt like there was a lot more pressure on my mana pool really early in the campaign, and it wasn't like a good kind of pressure. It wasn't the kind of pressure where you feel like you're engaging with a resource mechanic and it's like interesting or, you know, occupying your attention. kind of like, I feel like Diablo 3, if one of the things they might have done right, I would say, is resource management. Like, each class has a unique resource, and they have their own cadence and logic to their resource management. Here, since we have these generic resources and every class has to sort of bend them to whatever item and skill setup that they want to apply, I thought it felt a little bit overwrought in the campaign. That if you got a tabula this league, usually that feels extremely lucky. I don't think it would have felt that great this league. I guess you could sell it in trade and pawn it off on somebody else, but there are tons of builds that just can't use a tabula. You cannot afford to use a 6-link skill on a lot of builds in the campaign. So I feel like the value of that item got a little bit nerfed, a bit nerfed, frankly. I will say that this build specifically, and really any Hierophant Totem build, is not going to feel that pressure nearly as much or as long as a lot of the other builds. So if you're trying to escape that, this is actually a pretty good build. As soon as I started investing into my mana, because we were going to do that for Mind Over Matter and our build tendencies anyway, like once I got, especially this wheel here, and like a little bit of Arcane Capacitor, things felt better. And especially, once you get the Ascendancy, this Ritual of Awakening, after second lab, everything's fine. This is a 5-link, and we've got more mana and more mana nodes to get. The flask situation is also a little bit strange. I think a lot of people would disagree with me, just on the sense that, like, I've always hated the flask system in this game. It's one of my least favorite aspects about it. So anything that actually reduces the importance or like the imperative of having to use your flasks every 5 seconds was kind of a good thing to me. I really despise that aspect of PoE's gameplay, and I especially despise the fact that they were so against the automation of it when that imperative existed, right? Like, if you didn't use flasks, your build was trash, and they were just buttons you clicked every 5 seconds, and they were just temporary. You know what I mean? It's a gameplay loop that I despise. So the nerfing of it to me is like, it's fine outside of the very specific context, I think, of moving. Like the Quicksilver, the amount of charges you don't have for Quicksilvers as much as you used to, like conjunction with the nerfs to Flame Dash and Frostblink, or not Frostblink, Dash and Smoke Mine, which were probably the most used movement skills. Moving around feels a lot worse in the campaign, and there's no avoiding it. I won't get too into the topic because as somebody who worked on Marvel Heroes for like almost 4 years, like hearing Chris mention Marvel Heroes in the context of like changes that disrupt the game in a way the player base doesn't like, it's funny to me because the movement changes were the catalyst for that disruption in Marvel Heroes. It wasn't really the everything else. It was very specific to that one thing. And unfortunately, I would say it doesn't feel better executed here than it did in Marvel Heroes. There are different problems. That Marvel Heroes had an issue where the content and the boss design did not properly reflect like the receipts of why we changed the movement skills. We didn't change them in time. We weren't done changing all the bosses and updating everything before we rolled the movement skills out. And everybody was like, the game's the same, but we can't move the same. That's kind of what this feels like to me. They did it in a different way, but it feels like it's the same game, but it doesn't feel right sometimes because I'm going too slow. On some level, I almost feel like buffing the base movement speed of a character would actually help mitigate this a lot. I think the game is actually too slow at its slowest. And I think that's part of the problem, which sounds, it might be anathema to them and their goals of slowing the game down, but I really do think that the start of the game and the first 4 acts, that particular speed of movement is too slow. And so I think even just adding 10% movement speed as a baseline to everybody, I think would mitigate a lot of how bad I think it feels to move in the game right now sometimes. It's not going to fix things like, the charge recovery of Flame Dash, but I think people will get used to that. and they will come to like terms with that. But I think it's when the charges are down and the flasks are out that the base movement speed is just too low. And that sort of disparity between buffs are active or my skills have charges or they don't and they're not active is too much. So there's a balance there because you want the buffs to feel impactful and you want the movement skill to feel important to have charges, but I don't know. That's my take on it. Anyway, I've been rambling long enough. I've been streaming way too long, so I suppose that's inevitable. I am enjoying myself, and I'm looking forward to exploring Forbidden Rite totems a lot more. If you want to see more of this, I'll be streaming it all week for sure. I'll probably be streaming a lot for the next couple weeks, really. I have a feeling I'll probably wind up writing a guide for this totem setup a lot like the one I did for Freezing Pulse totems. I'd like to have it written before they nerf it. I have a feeling that this league will be like the best league to play this build, and there's probably going to be some changes to the skill or its dynamic with a totem like immediately in the next patch. But it's definitely a fun skill, and I think it'll serve as like a perfectly fine replacement for Freezing Pulse totems in the interim. So feel free to stop by. Find me at twitch.tv/WallachTV. I typically start streaming around 2 p.m. Pacific. Or you can jump into the Discord. I'll leave a link to that in the description too if you want to see like some more endgame PoB concepts for this build, which we've been kicking around lately. I don't think I'm going to get too into that until PoB updates, but I'm going to go get some sleep. It's very late, and I will see you guys tomorrow for day 2 of Expedition. Good night.